session. I always want to say thank you to everybody who comes back after they've eaten. That really is a challenge, so we're glad that you're here. But I understand why, because we have a great speaker. So, Charlie, come on up. And
thank you. Well, I'm very glad to be here. I didn't even really know this institute existed, and I'm glad it does. Yeah, and yeah, well, well, you know, I hang out with physicists. But I've had a long-standing love for computer science, which partly comes from Michael. But anyway, I'm going to talk about something that has to do with computational complexity. But I've noticed that it's in the back of everybody's minds, the apparent instability of civilization that's going on right now. It's due to the spread of misinformation and disinformation. So I'll talk about that a little bit first. That's something that I've started to care about and try to introduce some new ideas. Not so much just how terrible and scary a problem it is, but what scientists can do about it in a way by being better scientists. So if we think about this, our species has had the capacity, even at the beginning of the 20th century, to sustain a large population, now maybe 10 times as larger at the beginning of the 20th century, in peace and comfort and good health. But we haven't really managed to do that very well. And in the middle of the 20th century, the failure to do this instigated the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And toward the end of the 20th century, after the Cold War, it looked as if this technological optimism might be pretty plausible. But now, due to well, we're not exactly sure what it's due to, but the increased range and speed of communication, it looks pretty gloomy. The social world, with this electronically facilitated, most people seem to enjoy being in these self-isolating bubbles where they are soothed and entertained and incited by incompatible versions of reality. I wrote an article about this, which was illustrated by a cartoon from The New Yorker, which showed two neighbors. One of them was looking over the fence at the other neighbor, except that one of the neighbors was completely upside down compared to the other one. So the fence was upside down and he was looking over the bottom of the neighborhood. And I thought the good caption for that would be, "Love your neighbor who doesn't vote like you." But the caption was, "I'm always scared he's going to drop in on us." But anyway, so this is, it's funny, but it's also scary. And I'm going to ask, what can scientists specifically do to nudge society into what I would call the benign basin of attraction of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? And this, I always ask scientists, what is their favorite wrong idea? Something that they believed, but then changed their mind about. And my favorite wrong idea was technological optimism. And what made me change my mind was really the Fermi paradox. And I looked at this timeline of life on Earth, and it started sort of pretty as soon as it could. And complex life sort of started halfway through the available time, and civilization is like a few hundred thousandths of the time available to it. So that's a little scary from the Copernican viewpoint. Now here's what scientists can do about it, I think. How many of you have a favorite wrong idea or have thought about that? Everybody who has a favorite wrong, you know what I mean by a favorite wrong idea, yeah. How many, you may have more than one. Raise your hands if you have a favorite wrong idea. You don't have to say what it is. Okay, they're popping up, yeah. Yeah, of course you've got some. Even some that you don't realize are wrong yet. Okay. Anyway, I think that it is a unique blessing of our profession that we enjoy being proved wrong. We'd rather be right about nature than right about what we used to believe. And this way of thinking prepares people to attack big problems less judgmentally and more constructively. For example, blaming people in the particular environment for developing anti-rational and hateful attitudes or believing false conspiracy theories is not good science. It's not effective engineering, not effective mitigation. And I found myself guilty of this when I got very angry at the Republicans in the House of U.S. Representatives. You know, I said, how could anybody do that? But if they're all doing that, there must be something that's not their individual faults that's going on, a natural process that ought to be understood. Even without misinformation, there are some contradictions in the Enlightenment notions of a right to pursue happiness. In fact, it's an engine of inequity, those are two different things, because most people's happiness depends on the success of their children, or if they don't have children, of their proteges. And unless society is already so egalitarian that your success in life depends mainly on your own endowment, your parents are going to try to advantage you relative to other children. And this is very evident in American high schools now. People were working really hard to get their kids into the best colleges. Now, so this works sort of like the prisoner's dilemma. It leads to less than optimal outcomes. So the most successful societies have unconsciously, usually, or consciously adopted customs that temper this inequality and instill a kind of community pride so the members treat each other's children nearly as well as their own. And this is not a new idea. In fact, you can even find it in biology. These symbioses between trees and funguses and so on. But this is Barbara Woodhouse, is my sister, but she's actually a professor of law and wrote a book about children's law and children's rights, in which she points out how communities can instill this kind of pride in each other's success. But it takes very long to develop after some disruption, and it takes very long, hasn't really developed in today's global village. Now, of course, there are less rational aspects of human nature. People suffer from conservation bias, and they close their minds when threatened or disrespected. And they fear dramatic hazards like terrorism and shark attacks more than mundane ones like overeating. And they think of everything as either good or bad to a first approximation. I mean, I hate to say this in front of people who work with zeros and ones all the time, but you know, you can see this. You know, if it's good, it's good. If it's bad, it's bad. And as far as eating things, let you go down the food supplements aisle. I forget who it was who said that the American attitude is that if a little is good, a lot of the good thing is better, and way too much is just about right. So when things go wrong, people look for someone to blame rather than blaming. Oh, that QR code on the first page. If you go there, you'll see the this talk with wherever these links will work. I mean, I'll try clicking this one, but I don't think it's, whoops, something did happen, but it's not what I wanted. Okay, anyway, I'm very frustrated by Wikipedia, but I keep going to it and trying to edit it and connect articles about different subjects, which is a lot easier than writing a new article and having it accepted. But it worked better than Google. Google, I know some people here work for Google, but they may agree with me about this. But in the early days, before it got saturated with advertising, you could find out about things a lot easier from it than you can now. And the reason is that, part of the reason is that it didn't have Wikipedia's somewhat purposeful adjustments in fostering cooperation, and of course that it doesn't take ads. So what can scientists do? I think they should become more humble about their own blind spots and really proud of the fact that they changed their minds. And they should realize that many of the things, I guess we all, as scientists, we already realize it, that many of the things we believe now, we won't believe 10 or 20 years from now. But this is not how the public views us. The public often views scientists as rather arrogant and telling everybody else what to think. And we don't live up to the central principle of our profession as well as we should. For example, scientists are often resented for having a condescending attitude toward religion. But even scientists who are outspokenly anti-religious have a submission before nature that is very much like a religious person's submission before God. Now, in my own life, I got this respect for science when I was about 10 years old. I was a teenager, and the Kinsey books about human sexual behavior had just come out. And so when my parents were away, I avidly read these books. But the lesson that I took from them were the most long-lasting. Of course, I found out some things I was curious about, but the long-lasting lesson that I took from these were what Kinsey said about science, and you can read that yourself. Well, this need for humility is beautifully emphasized by Einstein himself, because he, of course, nobody can complain him that he wasn't good at thinking outside the box. But he was so offended by quantum weirdness that he couldn't appreciate its beauty and power. So that's none of us can do it alone. Now, most scientists are skeptical of supernatural elements in religion, like miracles and divinely revealed scriptures. And I'm thinking of how I've heard one scientist that I know who was a pretty seriously religious person, and he said that God wrote two books, the Book of Nature and the Scriptures. And many scientists, I guess including myself, say actually he only wrote one book, and the Scriptures is part of the Book of Nature. Anyway, the idea that it should be stunningly obvious that the simplest explanation is something that these supernatural elements of religion violate. This idea has had a rich complexity revealed in it by algorithmic information theory and the Boltzmann brain problem. How many people know what the Boltzmann brain problem is. I think everybody here, so you don't have to tell you. Wait. Okay, I can tell you about Boltzmann brain problem. Okay, so it's the idea that if the universe comes to equilibrium, which according to current cosmological models ours will, after a very long time, and stays there forever, then the spontaneous fluctuations will infinitely often produce something that is closely approximate to the current state of your head, including all of your memories. But these memories will be false memories of things that didn't really happen because it's trillions of years since there was anybody alive on Earth. You won't be able to tell that you were one of these accidental assemblies of atoms. There was a nice cartoon about it. There was a couple sitting together, and the man asked the woman, the woman asked the man, why can't I get you to commit to anything? And he said, well, it's because I'm a Boltzmann brain. And she said, what's that? And he says, well, it's a collection of atoms that randomly get assembled in the infinite vastness of space and time into thinking that it's a person living in 20th century, on the Earth in 20th century world. And the woman says to him, well, where does that leave me? And he says, you're not going to like this. According to the Boltzmann brain picture, his brain is there, and she is just a pattern of temporary chemical things which makes him think that she's there. So anyway, so that's what a Boltzmann brain is. And so it's thinking of what's simple is actually itself not very simple. That's the line. Now here's another thing that's pretty much good about science and different. But science has its share of acronyms and words that don't mean what they sound like. But it differs from other areas of human endeavor, and it tries to be neutral point of view. In other words, you try to avoid euphemisms and dysphemisms. In fact, they are kind of red flags. I'm thinking of the dysphemism of which Alan Turing was convicted, gross indecency. He didn't even say what he did. And at the same time, Kinsey was discovering the continuum of what we now call sexual orientation. Now, unfortunately, and this is getting to another thing I want to say about how scientists should behave that are perhaps different from how everybody else should behave. Fine distinctions are lost in the political arena. And identity politics, as we can see, is uniquely effective for remediating long unacknowledged injustices, but it is, like other politics, it oversimplifies the complex dynamics of power and status. The same complexity that demagogues exploit to sensitize people to their imagined or real grievances. And like other politics, it pushes people into ill-fitting categories. As I remember when early gay rights activists in the United States bashed bisexuals for being cowardly or self-hating homosexuals, as if they were passing for straight, to borrow a pejorative from the similarly fraught history of race relations. So I think that politicians and political activists, even when sincerely pursuing the greater good, find it necessary to appeal, or often find it necessary to appeal to their constituents' baser instincts and hoping to rein them in after the goal has been achieved. I mean, any political campaign is full of this. And while they deserve our admiration for this feat, if it succeeds, we scientists should be no part of it. We should not speak unscientifically about our own research, avoid research because it might be weaponized, or remain silent when it is weaponized even by our allies. And our expert advice should not bend under external political pressure or the internal pressure of our own politics. Now, I used a word here that I shouldn't have used because weaponize is a pejorative word. And I tried to, as an afterthought, put a a neutral definition of it. Now, fortunately, the technology that spawned misinformation can sometimes help combat it. While authoritarian governments are busy using advances in computer science to stabilize themselves against dissent and really discourage their populations from thinking like scientists, there should be a big movement for ethical social engineering. In other words, using the tools of natural and social scientists together, just as we think now about human genome editing and geoengineering, what would constitute ethical, UDHR-friendly engineering governments? I think that our systems of government are in need of improvement in the direction for understanding how misinformation works. Now, I thought of one example where computer science can actually help in a small way. One of the more intractable kinds of misinformation-driven violence is the fear that a stranger who looks different from you might be dangerous. Now, with a device like this, you could allay that fear somewhat by having the two people who fear each other have reassure each other of non-dangerousness by an interaction over well, they were safe distance apart. For example, the traffic stops. And if they were routinely preceded by a cell phone conversation before the two people were closer together than I am to any of you, it might have prevented a number of unfortunate deaths. So different models of governance and society are being tested in different parts of the world, fortunately, because the world is not so, the correlation length is of continental size more than entirely global. And I have a friend who lived for a long time in Denmark. He tells me that Danes are proud of their harmonious society, and that when a Danish bank advertised an advice session on how to minimize your tax liability, people picketed it for encouraging bad citizenship. And I teased Charlie Marcus because I said, I noticed in this city, adults tend not to wear bike helmets, but they make their kids wear them. And I said that must be because the social safety net is so good here that if your parent goes missing, the kids usually don't notice for a while. So anyway, I hope our species will choose solidarity and fact-friendly models. And I think one of the things that will help us the most is that people don't like to live in dictatorships, and they will leave. Okay, so that's the what shall I say, the philosophical political part of my talk. You can ask questions about that, or maybe save them to the end. But this thing is a little bit more. It's philosophical, but it's not. It's much more scientific. So, computational complexity theory, can it help us reason about ethics and our place in the universe without needing to define consciousness or count observers? You need to define consciousness if you have to decide who has rights and who should be protected. And you need to count observers to know with what we're seeing in the mostly classical looking universe around us is representative of what our theory is purporting to explain. The questions like fine tuning in cosmology are among the big unanswered ones. So on ethics, should ethics be human oriented only? And probably most people think that not so. In fact, at least in many parts of the Western world, people are very careful about abusing animals. I created a website called Mineralarians to show that it advocated eating foods that are made from rocks and water, That is, they're made of synthetic chemicals so that they can be eaten without the cruelty to our relatives that even vegetarians commit by eating creatures that are quite similar to them in almost every way, and have similar instincts to avoid unfavorable environments. Of course, I think it's sort of a new age idea that plants have actual sense of pain. But I made this website to expose the contradiction between wanting to be natural and wanting to be kind. As far as I know, there are no actual mineralarians, but there is a company that makes a food for people who are in a hurry. It's called Soylent, and it's what I would describe as trace mineralarian food because some of it is actually made from plants. Anyway, so this is exactly what I made this website to make fun of. So I think it's not a sound idea to identify natural as good and artificial as bad. In fact, my late wife said she didn't like beavers because they're almost as destructive as people. And then here's a beaver pond, and the beavers cut down a lot of trees and made this thing and probably killed a lot of the other trees by flooding them. And so I'm fascinated by them, actually, myself. So here's my idea, which I've been advocating for a while. Use computational complexity to identify what is what I call logically deep, something that contains internal evidence of a complicated history and would be difficult to replace if it were destroyed. So the idea grows out of Occam's razor, in which you're given a phenomenon, you're told to, it was actually stated much better by Aristotle than by Occam, but anyway, given an observed phenomenon, you choose the explanation which is the most concise in terms of its hypothesis, even if the path to get there, logical path, is long and complicated. But the problem with this is that it's hard to quantify the relative economy of hypotheses. And the usual use of Occam's razor is for scientists who have an existing idea to say that the new idea is profoundly more complicated than their old idea. But we should do the tools of computer science allows us to escape this. We replace the hypotheses by alternative programs for the universal computer. So this is just you're probably all familiar with this idea from algorithmic information theory, Kolmogorov complexity. So the shortest program is identified as the most plausible explanation of this output, and therefore this computation path is the most plausible history of it. Now this definition is a little bit unstable, so to clean it up a little bit, more precisely, we have two parameters: the how deep a thing is. This is a digital object. And with how many bits of confidence we believe it's that deep. So that situation, it holds whenever any algorithmic description of it that can produce it in fewer than d steps is compressible. It's self-compressible. It could be produced by a smaller program by at least b bits. So it has a deficit of randomness that makes it implausible to that level. So things that generate complexity over time. This is my one-dimensional cellular automaton. People who do general relativity would turn it like this so time goes upward. And if you start it from a periodic initial condition with a little defect, it does this. And this is a reversible deterministic automaton. And it gets more and more until it wraps around and turns into a sort of a mess. This is the rule, yeah. It's a second order rule like Newton's equation of motion. It takes the state of a site at the future time is equal to its state at the previous time, XOR the predicate of these four neighbors being equally white and black. So if you think of it as an Ising model, if these four are tied between up and down, this exerts no, there's no coupling energy of this to this, and therefore it can change. In fact, it must change. Whereas if they're unbalanced, there would be an energy change in changing them. So an energy conserving dynamics, it can't change. So that's how it works. If we try to look at a little piece of this, we'd say, well, what's its most explanation? It was pretty easy to make something like that. But if you take a size piece of this size, you would say, well, how could exactly this configuration have arisen? And you would probably come to the conclusion, after much head scratching, that it probably arose from that simple rule and this simple initial condition run for this amount of time. But of course, if you run this thing for a long time, exponential in the size of the system, it'll turn into a mess. And the typical time slice will now become, according to that criterion, shallow and random with only short-range correlations. And the reason is that the minimal program for making it that way, you have to say how long to run it, which itself is an approximately n-digit number. So, okay, guess this is the definition. Now, why is it why does it dare to be an alternative measure of the good? Now, I say, well, it attributes value to literature, cultural artifacts, evolved genomes, complex thoughts and emotions if you treat them in an utterly material way. And destroying the last copy of a book is especially bad because it destroys information not available elsewhere. Now, the disadvantages are that there are some computations that take a lot of work, which seem to be not worth saving, not valuable. And the example that came to mind is the vastly energy wasting computations involved in mining Bitcoins. In fact, Gilles Brassard describes Bitcoin as the second most harmful application of computer science. Facebook. So a possible answer would be that these computations they're not doing any good in themselves, but they wouldn't have been done if the distributed ledger they made possible was not of some value, at least some people wanted. Now, another more important problem is scaling with number. How do we believe that many people's happiness is not like many copies of a good book? Well, the answer is, I think a good answer is that people's experiences are so different that they scarcely overlap. An adolescent on falling in love for the first time is likely, my son said this to me once, I'm pretty sure nobody has ever felt this before. And I said, well, I believe so. But anyway, for other kinds of experience, it probably really is true. And then, in fact, this is a very old idea, that is whoever destroys a life, it's as if he destroyed an entire world. Well, if each person is unique in their experience, what about each tree? Then the beavers killed a lot of trees, so has this not a very evil deed, even though there are many trees of the same kind in the forest? Well, I think the idea is that it's more quantitative than that. If trees are unique in experience, well, maybe bacteria somewhere below humans and above bacteria, the individuality of experience fades away. So killing an individual is no longer like destroying a whole universe. So here's what I have to say about the hard problem of consciousness. So the hard problem of consciousness is that even completely understanding a physical system and its dynamics cannot establish whether it's conscious. And maybe the reason is, or maybe a scientific view of that, is that it's really a fuzzy notion. It feels very immediate, but maybe it's something that can't be pinned down. And by using logical depth as an ethical criterion, you don't have to pin it down. You say whatever it is, whether it's conscious or not, if it's logically deep, you ought to keep it, and then you shouldn't erase it. And I think in a similar way, logical depth could be used to discount the sincere but hallucinatory experiences of Boltzmann brains. For example, what you say is, what you should do, how you should act, is to believe that you are real in a world that's real around you. This would be the advice to the guy who says he's a Boltzmann brain. Even if it's overwhelmingly probable that you are an accidental recurrence of that same local configuration. The reason is because if you are a Boltzmann brain and begin to act like you want to do something, you won't be capable of any action anyway, so it doesn't matter what you do. You might as well do what you would do if you were real. Oh, so that same cellular automaton on an infinite lattice, I found an initial condition for it, and this says my time is just about up here. So, which has a simple past, but an unboundedly complicated future, which never equilibrates, because there's always space for its garbage to escape into. So this is like a toy Big Bang, and here it is a longer scale. And that's my bibliography, or it's a very crude bibliography. You can look at. So this is a good time to stop. I'll show you a little picture at the end, though, which is oh, come on. It doesn't back through the beginning. This is the conference that's really started the physics computation in 1981 at MIT. There. It's got Feynman in it and other people. Okay, go.
Any questions? Okay, thank you very much. And thank you again, sure.